Good evening, Dale Calder. I'm the creator of the Freedom's Call Facebook page, and some of you I know have been around here for quite some time and have been very receptive to the content I've posted here, to the Freedom's Call website, and to the Rolls of Honour, which really what this page is all about. Some of you will be new here, and if this is the first time you've landed on the page, then I extend to you a warm welcome. So let's perhaps just start the ball rolling by telling you a little bit about what the Freedom's Call roles are, and perhaps what they're not. And I'm going to start really with the main role now, what I call the big role, and this is the second NZEF role. So for those of you that don't know, the members of the second New Zealand Expeditionary Force that went overseas between the years of 1939-40 through to about 1948, they are the people that have been honoured on the rolls. And when I say they, I'm talking about those who had some sort of connection with the province of Northland before they left, and indeed in some cases in more recent times. Since then, there have been extrapolations made of that role, and there have been further roles produced as a result of more and more information coming online. But I'm not going to talk about those today at any length. I did want to tell you a little bit about the second NZEF role. Now remember, the first NZEF were those of our soldiers who went overseas during the First World War. They are not to be found on any of these roles. That's the first point I would make. This role, this big role, is for second NZEF soldiers and nurses only. Now, as I said, second NZEF. So what that means is that those that actually went overseas during the war, or who appear on the nominal rolls, or called the embarkation rolls, which was a pretty strong indication they were destined to go overseas. One or two of them never made it, and they're still on the rolls. There are actually a couple of people too that I have entered in the postscript in the lower part of the rolls who almost certainly were overseas, but they don't feature on the rolls at all. But that's another matter. So how did this role come about? Well, if I go back to around about 2006, I just moved here to Auckland. The thought came to me one day, look, probably sometime around Anzac Day, almost certainly it would have been. You know, the thought crossed my mind that, sure, we were memorialising many of our soldiers who had not returned from the war. There were physical memorials and plaques of honour and that right throughout the country. But a lot of the information that was on these memorials and plaques and honours boards and what have you was incorrect. It was either incorrect, or in some instances it was bereft of, you know, they were lacking in that there were names that should have been put on there that weren't. And so I sort of thought to myself, well, wouldn't it be really rather neat to create a role where we could pull in every soldier and nurse that had some connection to, and at that time it was Whangarei, not Northland, had some connection to Whangarei, and place them on a digital database. And that would have two purposes really. One, it would serve to memorialise these people, and here they would be all together, if you like, comrades in action, but all appearing in the one place. And it would also prove to be a great genealogical whakapapa tool as well for any family wanting to research ancestors, or for historians, military historians that want to dig a little deeper into their uncles, or not so much uncles in the case of a military historian, but want to find a little bit more about, the service that was rendered by Northlanders during that war. The nominal rolls, or what I've sometimes referred to as the embarkation rolls, were to be found in the Auckland Library from which I worked. I would have spent probably 4 or 5 hours minimum a day over many months working through the 120,000 odd entries and extracting anyone whom I perceived to have a connection with Whangarei at that time. I was to do a second trawl through the rolls much later, but we'll leave that to talk about in another time. So initially what we had was a fairly comprehensive roll, but it was just limited to those that lived within an area of, I think I said around about 50 kilometres of Whangarei City, or Whangarei Town as it would have been then. So everyone within that perimeter, I was going right through all of this information and creating a database for them. And that was done on an Excel spreadsheet. Actually, originally, it was all done by hand and then transposed onto a spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet. So the information that was to be found on these rolls gave us a little bit of a picture as to the military service of the people that were on there. For example, you'd have their name, you would have their rank, you would have their serial number. Now, these guys, some of them went away on just the one embarkation overseas, some went away 2, 3, even 4 times overseas. So where there were multiple embarkations, then you'll see multiple entries on the roll. And each one of these embarkations is colour-coded. So, there might be people that went away prior to March 1940, then you'll see another person underneath that might have been away in the January to December 45 intake, or whatever. So you'd also see the unit to which they were attached, whether that person was single, or married, divorced, or whatever, where they enlisted, the last known address, and their next of kin. And that was pretty much it. That's what the sort of information that you would find on the rolls. Now, as I said to you, much later I was to go back through all those rolls again when I made the decision to extend out beyond Whangarei and to essentially encompass the whole of Northland. And by Northland, I'm talking from the North Cape down to around about Wellsford. So if we took a line from Port Albert, Wellsford, across the barrier, from there on up to the North Cape was the area that I focused on. So initially, we were looking at, in determining, who had connections to Northland, I was looking at things like where they enlisted, their last known address, and their next of kin, where the next of kin lived. And if any of that information, any one piece of that data pointed back to that person having a connection to Northland, then that person was entered. First of all, as I say, in a handbook, and they say there's no fool like an old fool, but anyway, and then it was later put across and entered onto this spreadsheet. Now, so hopefully that gives you some idea as to who you're going to see on the roll. As I say, that has since been extended out as a result of that second trawl to encompass people from further afield, soldiers and nurses from further afield. So I guess originally perhaps I had 2,000-3,000 names on there, I don't know. Currently we're looking at around about 8,000 entries on that spreadsheet, relating to I would say over 6,500 soldiers and nurses. And the information relating to those people is spread across around about 35 columns. So just to be quite clear though, who is not on there, who you would not see on there. So first of all, you won't see veterans from other wars on there unless they served overseas in World War II. So what that also means is that you're not going to see members of the Home Guard there, and you're not going to see those who served in the New Zealand military forces in New Zealand there either. And of course on this particular role you're not going to see any who served in the other branches of the services. But there is another role for that. So that gives you a little bit of a picture of this. Now later on, and I'll talk about this in another video, what I picked up from the nominal roles was extended substantially, and you'll learn more about that in the subsequent video. So you know, we're getting into things like those that didn't return, you know, where they lie buried, you know, when they were killed, dates of birth and death for all those that are on the rolls, where they might lie buried, lots of other information as well, you know, but we'll talk about that in another video. I will say, however, though, that some roles have been extrapolated from, and lists have been extrapolated from this big, this very, very big role. So I've actually created individual embarkation roles from this as well. And I would just also add here that both on the big role and on the embarkation roles, if there was a person who had an alias, and that alias, you know, say the surname differed pretty markedly from the name that's on the roll, then that entry was entered in twice. So you would see the name that was on the roll, and you'd also see the alias as well. So there were, I think, 14, if my memory serves me right, embarkation roles, and there have been extrapolations for all who served in each of those embarkations. And some of them, as I say, embarked more than the one time. There's also a Lest We Forget role. Now, the Lest We Forget role was a subsequent creation, but that was derived from those that I found out to have not returned. So that those that died in the course of active service overseas between that period, between 1940 and 1948. One or two did actually die in New Zealand, but they'd served overseas prior to that, so their death details are recorded as well. Now, there were a number of women who served either with the Women's Army Corps, with the WACS, or with the New Zealand Army Nursing Service. And so I was able to also pull out a separate role for all of those nurses. As I was to obtain further information over the years, I was able to ascertain many who were prisoners of war. So there were sources of information that I was able to draw on to record who had been captured as prisoners of war, where they were captured, and in some instances the camps where they served. The Maori Battalion, we saw many of the men, and I think yes, many of the men on this roll serve with the Maori Battalion. There is a Maori Battalion website which has its own roles, so I was able to also ascertain who of these men, and some of them actually served with other units or embarked with other units, but later transferred across to the Maori Battalion. There weren't so many that went the other way. Also, I've been through pretty much all of the Auckland Museum Cenotaph roles as well, roles of honour as well. When I started off, there was almost nobody up there. Certainly no one who was still around. The memorialisation there really related to those that had not returned from overseas. But with the passage of time, we've seen virtually every single one of the people on this roll of mine appear up on the museum rolls, and I almost wonder whether I might have galvanised them into action or something. I'm not sure about that, but I'm still providing some information to them even now. So prison war rolls, Maori Battalion rolls, other forces roll, the nurses roll, and of course the main roll. Now, very recently, I've also produced a listing breaking down those who served in the 2nd NZEF and also those who served in other forces. So if you could imagine two lists, two separate listings, and the names of those that also had close kin served. Now by close kin I mean a wife or a husband, a father or a mother, a brother or a sister. And it is quite surprising just how many names are on that, of those two roles now. What I call the familial role, and I think that's going to prove of great benefit. The website itself I want to touch on very briefly. It's a tremendous resource in its own right. I think there are presently around 32 pages on that. Some of those you're not going to be too interested in visiting. Some of you will really just want to focus on downloading the roles. But there's a lot of extra information there for you that you may find of interest, and it may point you to other resources that you didn't know about. You know, if you're wanting to get information about, for example, medals, military service records, and so on. Now, I'm going to just shortly wrap this up because I think I've covered a fair bit of ground. The one thing that I didn't mention to you, though, is that there is a column in the main roll which is a catch-all for everything that I hadn't been able to pick up conventionally. And so in that column you're going to find a lot of information that perhaps you'd never known before, and that information has been derived from Cenotaph records, Maori Battalion records, from birth and death indices, from cemetery records, from genealogical records, family trees, whakapapa, just a ton of information, very, very useful information. So if you were to take just one line of that roll and just scan across all 32 columns, you would be taking in quite a lot of information about that one person. Now, as I say, we're looking at around about 6,500 names on this roll and over 8,000 entries. I might add too, just as an aside, I'll briefly mention that the other forces roll that has been compiled, and we'll talk about that next time, along with some other information, but the other forces roll, I don't have exact numbers right now, but I'm guessing it must be up around getting close to 1,200 on there. It's less ambitious in its scope, but it still has a lot of information about many of our airmen, sailors, those that serve with other forces overseas. And when I say airmen and sailors, I'm talking about Royal New Zealand Air Force, Royal Air Force, Royal Navy, Royal New Zealand Navy, Merchant Navy. There's a lot of information up there. But anyway, I think that's enough for today. I just wanted to give you a little bit of a background. If there are a few things that I've missed out on, I'll touch base on those in my next video. as I mentioned in an earlier post today, it's my hope that if I can get some decent software up and running, we may be looking another 2 or 3 videos out before that happens, but if I can get some decent software that will enable me to point you in the direction of some of the blocks of data that you'll find on these roles, then I'll certainly put that videos up so that you'll be able to sort of take a closer look at all of what you can see there, and I can perhaps elaborate a little bit more on just what each column refers to. So with that, thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video. It's probably dragged on a little longer than I intended, but hopefully it's given you a little bit of an introduction to the roles, and especially that big role. I'll just repeat that website address again: http://freedomscall, it's one word, freedomscall.nzmkr.com/WordPress. Very important that you put the word WordPress on the back of that URL so that you land directly on the home page. Now, just one last thing, or a couple more things just to mention. There is a quick start guide which is also downloadable from the website. I will be doing a little bit more updating on that, but it's pretty much up with the play. And I just want to talk about the menu system that you see at the top of that web page. As I said, there's the home page, but then you will see menus. I think there's 6 menus in all, 5 of which have sub-menus. So if you click on the second or third menu that you see at the top of the page, you'll see that opens up into sub-menus, and every one of the entries, every one of those sub-menus, of course, takes you to a different page. So you're going to be looking at, as I say, well over 30 pages or more. Anyway, thank you very much for coming along, and I look forward to having a chat with you next time. Please, can I just say this? If you have any information at all that you would like to share about a family member that appears on any of these roles, please do that up here. I know that probably a group setting is the best for that rather than a page, because it's more easily seen, and I have mooted whether to move this across to a group. I haven't done that yet. But look, there might be, even if it's not something to do with the service of a relative during the war, you may want to talk about something that's happened after the war. Just recap on what they got up to after the war. You know, what did they do with their life? Anything at all, please feel free to share that up here. If there are any letters, postcards and that you're able to digitize and upload, that would be fantastic, because it's going to enrich this no end. Now, the Freedom's Call page actually goes beyond just the website and the roles. The page actually, I'm more than happy if anyone wants to recognize service personnel who have served in other spheres of conflict, whether pre-World War II or after World War II, or indeed if they haven't gone overseas, but they have served here in the Home Guard or in the military forces here or whatever, and you have memorabilia that you're able to digitize and put up here. Look, we'd love to see it. That's up on the page here. But do bear in mind, the website itself relates to those who went overseas during World War II, who served overseas in World War II. Thank you very much. We'll talk again soon. Bye for now.